Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and notorious loner, but can we get her to play nice with the other Olympians? Hello everybody and welcome to Maximus, the gaming channel dedicated to helping you get good. Today we're going to be covering Artemis, her build styles, and her very many boons. Now Artemis is actually my favorite god in terms of style and backstory as well, but it took me a long time to learn how to actually build her and use her. Now that I'm several hundred runs into the game, I've figured out that she's actually a high damage dealing support god that fits in nicely with pretty much everyone else by upping their damage slightly, as well as having some cool main builds with her. So just like all of our other god guides, which you should check out in the playlist up over here, we're going to start by going through all of her boons and talking about their strengths, weaknesses, and how to combine them. And then we're going to go through 3 different sample builds that I have created for you guys to show you what I think are either my favorite builds or the strongest builds that you can do with her. I've been looking forward to making this guide for a long time, so let's just get on into it. Okay, so jumping into her boons here, once again on my favorite Wikipedia page, we are going to start with Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish. Both of these apply a chance of inflicting a critical hit whenever you strike an enemy with them, and you can see they actually only give you 20% and 40% base additional damage depending on the rarity, of course. This is actually the worst numbers in the game, and you really become reliant on using inflicting criticals in order to make these 2 attacks stack up against all of the other attacks. In my opinion, these are actually, I know she's my favorite god, but these are actually the 2 weakest strike and flourishes in the game, because in order to have them do the same amount of damage as other gods' strikes and flourishes, you have to inflict a critical. And then they become more competitive, but because critical is the additional ability as opposed to dodge, knockback, or weak or anything like that, you do a little bit more damage, but you miss out on the additional ability, and you only actually do additional damage occasionally. There are some good weapons that can make use of these 2 attacks due to the way crit works, but I think for the most part, especially for beginners, you should try and avoid these and make use of Artemis's other boons instead. Okay, and we're actually going to take a second here and explain how critical works, because it's very complicated and it's taken me a lot of time looking at slowed down footage like the footage that you're seeing right now to understand how critical actually works. See, the way that critical functions is when you inflict a critical attack, is going to take the total sum of your damage, including all of your increases to damage, and then it's going to triple it and apply that damage. So for example, in this build here that you guys are going to see up against Mega right here, I've started out and I've got an additional, let's see here, 46% damage from my strike. I've got a 4% increase from a boldy boon that I picked up, another 50% from my magnetic cutter ability whenever I use my special attack on an enemy from my Talos gauntlets, and then I've actually picked up a chaos boon as well that does 77% damage. And I've also picked up heavy knuckle on the gauntlets here that make it so that my base damage is 35. So to summarize that, I've got base damage of 35, I've got a total of 177% bonus damage on my strike, and if you pay attention here, you're gonna see that when I hit her with my regular attacks, it does 79 damage. When I hit her with the magnetic cutter on, it does 97 damage. And then when I critical, it triples that 97 and becomes 291 damage. So it's actually a huge damage increase, obviously because it's triple, and this is without taking advantage of the fact that I also have Ruthless Reflex, which gives me another 50% bonus, and I also have the Backstab, which is going to give me another 50% bonus damage. So this clip we're going to see again later, but I actually knocked her down really quickly with this build because it's so high damage, and that is the basic function of how critical works. It sums up all of your bonus damage on any strikes or flourishes you have, and then is going to triple it whenever you inflict a critical. This is another example of that, where I have Chiron's bow here, And I've got a total, I'm doing 102 damage on critical hits here because I've got a special boon that is plus 40% crit damage. Now there are a couple of these boons that you can collect for Artemis that increase critical damage. That does not add onto your strike and flourish like regular damage does, where it's a bonus 40% to every single strike. Instead, it adds 40% to the critical effect, or 50% or 30%, whichever one you get. So that means that instead of doing triple damage, you're going to do 3.4 times damage. So it's actually a very, very significant damage increase, particularly the duo boon between Artemis and Aphrodite that increases your critical strike damage against weak foes. That's a 50% increase, which is huge, but we'll talk about that a little bit later, and I already have talked about in my Aphrodite guide, which again, check out up here if you have any questions. So wrapping up the Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish here, the weapons that I think these work the best on is the Hades Spear. After you do a spin attack, you get 150% bonus damage. The Gauntlets of Talos, like I just showed you, give you a 50% increase in damage after you use your magnetic cutter and pull enemies towards you. Zeus's shield is actually also very good at it because you can throw the shield and it will has up to, I think, 35 base damage in all of its blast bursts, and it attacks often enough that you get a lot of critical, so it's very good at dealing a high amount of burst damage that way. And then you can also take it on the Chiron bow. I kind of consider the Chiron bow one of the default best weapons to take the Deadly Flourish on, because you have a guaranteed up to 8 hits on a single target, which with Flourish being a 20% crit chance means you're guaranteed 1 crit, and you'll probably get more crits, especially if you pick up some pressure points, as we're going to talk about later on. The Hestia Adamant Rail increases the base damage of your first strike after you reload by a pretty significant amount as well. So getting a lucky crit off that's going to do a huge amount of base damage. And the Zagreus Shield, the base one, actually increases its base damage the further up you level it. So it's also going to benefit nicely from critical effects. Really, the key with using critical is to stack a lot of damage on whatever critical ability you have to actually make it worth it for passing up, deflect, weak, what have you. Okay, so enough of talking about critical here. Let's talk about the next boon, True Shot, which is actually probably, well, I say this a lot, but it really is one of my favorite casts in the game. It fires a cast that seeks foes with a 10% chance to do critical damage. It also actually travels much faster than any other cast, and it really does seek foes. It's pretty hard to miss with this unless you're intentionally doing it. It does do a fair amount of base damage as well, 70, 80, 90, 100. I think it's 4th highest or some such. And that crit chance is really nice on top of it. What I really like this cast because it has a potential to do massive damage on crit, and it's just fun to use. It's got ridiculous single target damage, and it flies really quickly, so you deal your damage very reliably, very quickly, and it also very nicely penetrates enemy shields. So the shielders on Elysium and also King Theseus, you will actually bypass their shields with this True Shot, which is very nice. And we'll talk more about this a little bit later because it is one of her main ways to build around, actually. Oh, and it also, because it has critical, has incredible scaling with any buffs to your cast damage, and is an incredibly deadly combo to take with the Poseidon Sword that lets you knock your Bloodstones free from enemies that have them lodged in them, so you can quickly just cycle these and do a ton of damage with them. Okay, moving on to her dash attack here. It's Hunter Dash, and it just makes so your dash strike deals more damage. I've played around with this a little bit, and the buff is pretty huge, 50, 75, and 100% damage, but really I think it's a pretty lackluster ability. I find I dash attack a decent amount, but not enough to really make this worth it. Where it is nice is if you do take the Deadly Strike, the critical strike, because it does stack on that with its dashing attacks, which can help you get a little bit more value out of your Deadly Strike. So I would take it in that case if you've picked up Deadly Strike and are looking for a good buff to it, but in general I would pass Hunter Dash up for other abilities. Okay, next we come to Artemis's aid, which, surprise, surprise, is one of my favorite aids. And that's because your call fires a seeking arrow with a 35% crit chance, and the arrow base damage is 100 to 120. And an interesting thing about this call is that it actually gets 5 God Gauge charge bars as opposed to the normal 4, so you can actually save, well, 4 arrows and then reach your maximum charge. And with maximum charge, you're firing 10 arrows, and out of those you can guarantee that 3 to 4 are going to crit, which is already 900 damage plus the other 700 to 600 to 700, so you're looking at about 1500 damage to about 1500 damage or so from a full bar of Artemis without any other damage increases or increases to your critical damage on top of that. I really like this. It's very hard to use though, because most calls give you some manner of protection, some invincibility, and Artemis's aid just kind of fires off and it does damage. Very useful against bosses, very useful in rooms, but you need to be confident in your ability to survive in addition to it. It does have really good scaling on any kind of damage increases that you can put on your call. I really like it, so give it a shot. You won't regret it. I promise. Okay, and then this boon deserves a special call out. It's technically a general buff boon, but it's so strong that I'm just gonna name it its own thing, and it is pressure points. Pressure points is kind of a cross between a general buff boon and a basic boon, because you don't need any prerequisites to take it, so it pops up very often and it adds crit chance to every single instance of your damage. That includes Doom, that includes Hangover, Blade Strikes, whatever it is, you get this crit chance on top of it, so it fits on any build, and it's going to increase your damage subtly at first, and then it will swiftly become more and more dramatic. The fact that this works on your cast, it works on your call, cast call, yeah, those are the right words, works on your cast, works on your call, it stacks on magic damage, and it stacks on physical damage. I take pressure points whenever I see it. It requires no additional skill on your part, it's just you doing your regular old attacking thing, and 1 in 20 attacks at the epic level, that's 5%, is going to do 3 times damage, just flat. It's super handy. And even better, the other reason why you should take pressure points is it unlocks all of Artemis's level 2 abilities. That's how it functions as a base boon, where other gods you would need to take one of the 5 slots, strike, flourish, call, cast, or dash, in order to unlock their secondary abilities. You can do that just with pressure points. And again, there's no reason not to take pressure points. It is that strong. And in addition to that, if that wasn't good enough, it actually adds critical chance. So if you do take Deadly Strike or Deadly Flourish, or well, her call or her cast as well, it adds its crit chance on top of that, making those abilities much, much better. On your flourish, you get a 25% crit chance. On your call, you get a 40% crit chance. And on your cast, you get a 15% crit chance, which sounds small, but actually adds up very, very significantly. Take pressure points, just take it. It's so good. This is the #1 thing that turns her into a damage dealing support god. So try it out, you're gonna love it, I guarantee it. Okay, then we move on to some of her general buff boons here. We have Exit Wounds, which I think is good, but super, super specialized. Your foes take damage when your bloodstone stuck in them is dislodged, and it's a decent amount of damage. It's 100 damage, 120, 140 base damage, so it scales up very quickly to do a lot of damage. The problem is you need to have 1 Infernal Soul for this. It won't work with Stygian Soul. If you're just regenerating your bloodstones, they don't drop, so it'll never trigger Exit Wounds. And 2, it takes a very long time for your bloodstones to drop without other buffs. So yeah, you know, it'll do 300 damage, 400 damage, but against regular enemies, they're usually gonna die faster than the drop rate of your bloodstones anyway, so I don't think this is worth it in most cases. With the Hera Bow, which increases your bloodstone drop time from enemies, I think it's worth it. It's pretty solid. This is deadly deadly on the Poseidon sword, amazingly good on the Poseidon sword, because all you have to do is special and bang, that's 300 damage if you've got all 3 bloodstones in the same enemy, just from hitting them with your special attack, and you immediately have your cast ready again. So there are a few very niche places where Exit Wounds is good. You can get, I think it's Swift Reload from Hermes as well, that makes it so that your bloodstones drop faster. But in general, I don't like Exit Wounds, except in very, very niche cases. So avoid this unless you've got the Haribo or the Poseidon sword, really. Okay, and next we have the other one of my favorite damage support abilities from Artemis, Support Fire. And it looks really, really lackluster when you just read it. After you cast or hit with an attack or special, fire a seeking arrow from 10 damage to 14 damage. 10 to 14 damage, right? Not that big a deal. Wrong. It's so good on so many weapons. It stacks damage so quickly, and in addition, it's magic damage. So any general buffs that you have is going to dramatically increase the damage that Support Fire does. This boon is so powerful with the Fists of Malphon, or Chiron's bow, or the Adamant Rail, or any quick striking weapon, or really any weapon except for maybe it's not so good on the spear. In pretty much every other case, Support Fire is an awesome boon to pick up, especially if you've taken Pressure Points. Pressure Points is one of the boons to unlock Support Fire, and it activates on Support Fire as well, where your Support Fire arrows also get the chance to inflict critical damage. And because every time you hit with an attack, you generate an extra arrow, you basically get 2 chances to crit every single time that you hit an enemy. So it's really, really powerful. Even if the arrow crits and it's 40, 50 damage, if that happens a few times as you're attacking along here, it will add up very, very quickly. And again, it's completely free hits, and it also combines very well with Artemis's other boons. Definitely pick up Support Fire. Between Support Fire and Pressure Points, pretty much always take them if they show up. These are the 2 boons that make Artemis the queen of just incredible damage support. They fit on almost every single build. Support Fire fits on almost every single build. Pressure Points does fit on every single build. So can't say it enough. Take Support Fire. It looks lackluster. It adds up really, really quickly and is excellent. Okay, now we come to the last of her general buff boons, and it is Hunter Instinct, and it is your God Gauge charges faster when you deal critical damage, and it's 0.25, 0.3, and 0.35% faster gauge gain, which is really hard to estimate how impactful that is, if I'm honest, because the math behind your God Gauge gain is strange, and I don't know how much plus 0.25 to plus 0.35 is going to increase it that much. So I put it around the same as the other God Gauge increasing general buff boons, where it's okay, it's nice. Definitely not a must take. I would take most other things before it. But, you know, it's there. If you're in a call build and you are taking critical, say you're taking Artemis's call as your main damage dealer, I would pick up Hunter Instinct, give it a shot, but probably one of her mid-tier boons. Okay, now we get into her dedicated buff boons, and we're going to start with Hidebreaker, which is your critical effects deal even more damage to armor, and this is 200% base to 400% base, which is really, really good. I mean, numbers-wise, is really, really good, because you go from 3 times to 5 times, all the way up to 6 times, all the way up to 6 times damage against armor. So, the thing is, though, it's only against armored enemies, and I don't feel the need most of the time to stack up my armor damage. Now, to be fair, I don't play at like 30 heat, where you have the crazy elite enemies teleporting around the field and having additional abilities, where you need to be able to burst through their armor quickly. I feel like Hidebreaker is very, very valuable in that situation, but for just generally playing the game and clearing the game, it's okay. I think it's lower mid-tier. There's definitely better dedicated buff wounds that we can go into. Speaking of which, we have Clean Kill, which is your critical effects deal even more damage. And I did mention this earlier in our description of the critical. This goes up to 30% additional damage at the epic level. And again, that's 3.3 times your max damage on whatever ability you're critting with. So this 30% increase is huge. It makes a massive, massive damage difference to your overall damage. And what's even better is you can actually level up Clean Kill. The first level in Clean Kill at the epic tier puts you an additional 40% crit damage. So you're doing 3.4 times your maximum damage per critical hit to the enemy. I really like Clean Kill. It is one of the best boons to pick up near the end of the game after you've built up a good amount of crit and worked it into your build really well. Clean Kill will help you just help push you over that final edge to really clear sticks very easily and then beat the final boss very easily as well. Okay, and now we come to the last of her general buff boons, and it is Hunter's Mark, which is after you deal critical damage to a foe near it is marked, which basically means that they have an additional chance to have a critical hit inflicted on them, going from 30% all the way up to 65% at the epic tier. This is phenomenal on Artemis because it covers one of her main weaknesses, which is actually clearing rooms. As soon as you get that first critical hit off, you then trigger Hunter's Mark. If you then go hit that enemy in critical, Hunter's Mark moves on to another enemy. So you basically just chain crits along all the enemies in a room and very rapidly burst them down because 65% crit chance at the best epic tier, plus say 15% from your basic strike, you're swinging at an 80% crit rate. So you're pretty much guaranteed to crit. And that's 3 times damage. Dodge the next guy with Hunter's Mark on him, hit him, 3 times damage. It's very, very, very powerful for clearing rooms easily and quickly. It does suffer a little bit against bosses since there's not always multiple enemies close enough to each other to bounce Hunter's Mark between. But it does help against the Champions of Elysium. It helps against the final boss when they spawn more enemies. And the Hydra, it can bounce between their heads as well. I don't find Hunter's Mark often enough in Tartarus to really think it's super useful against the Furies. But overall, I rate Hunter's Mark in the upper tier of Artemis's boons, as well as the fact that while an enemy has Hunter's Mark on them, it goes away as soon as you do a critical. It does trigger privilege status, so you do also get the damage boost from that, which is then multiplied by the critical effect that you hit them with. So Hunter's Mark, very strong, and it does also combine with support fire. So support fire, auto-homing and hitting enemies, can trigger Hunter's Mark and bounce that mark between other enemies as well, and just chain your criticals around. It's very, very strong that way, and I really like it. I find myself taking it pretty often, and it just makes clearing sticks so much easier. Okay, and now we've come to Artemis's legendary boon, which is one of the more subdued legendary boons, because all it is an extra 2 ammo to your cast. No big deal. 2 ammo. What are you going to do with that, right? Oh, except that if you have Infernal Soul, you now have 5 cast shots. And if you've got True Shot cast, that's 400 damage base just from her cast. And at least one of those is probably going to crit. Especially if you've been increasing your crit chance from other sources, especially if you then are triggering your supporting fire from throwing out 5 different casts, or you could just have 5 blade rifts on the field, or 5 ice crystals, or 5 hangover spheres, 5 whatever cast you want. This is an incredible legendary ability. It's not the strongest, I'll admit that. It requires you to have a build to take advantage of your cast properly. But if you take this and then add, say, some Hermes cast boons, where you are picking up your bloodstones faster, or they're traveling faster, or they're firing faster, or dealing some bonus damage, this is an incredibly, incredibly powerful boon. And the best part of it is that Artemis already has most of the cast buffs in her kit. So you'll probably have been building up your cast anyway in order to get to fully loaded. And all you have to do then is just pick up the Hermes boons you would normally, and you will have a very, very, very strong cast ability to be walking around with. It's one of the subtler abilities, but it's very good. And I will say it's also really nice on Stygian Soul. On Stygian Soul, it makes so that you've got 3 regenerating bloodstones just off the bat, which is super nice because every 3 seconds you're getting one of those back. So if you fire a cast second, you've always got a cast on hand, and it can be triggering if you're taking the Artemis cast, you're then going to be triggering your Abyssal or Boiling Blood abilities as well and getting that buff all the time. So I really like Fully Loaded. Again, Artemis is my favorite god because all of her boons combine to create builds that I really like to play with the hit and run style and dealing damage in different ways. So I'm a little bit biased, but I really like this legendary ability and I need to pick it up more. Okay, and with that, let's take a look at the sample builds that I've put together for you guys. Okay, so now we're going to step into our build section here, and we're going to start by looking at a build that I fondly call the Gentle Fist. This build is all about using the built-in damage increases to the various weapons that we were talking about earlier in the critical description to create a very strong single attack on your weapons. In this case, I'm going to be taking the Gloves of Talos, which have the damage boost after you special attack and pull enemies in towards you. So we're going to be building a very strong strike attack with a high crit chance to do a lot of damage to enemies. Okay, so we're starting this build at the end of Tartarus actually, just because it takes a little bit of work to get it going. And you can see we've got a level 2 epic deadly strike on our strike. We've picked up weak for protection on our special. We've also picked up a pressure points, and we've also picked up an abyssal strike that is adding 77% additional damage to our basic strikes. And you may recognize this from the description of critical attacks earlier on. This is at full speed, and you can see we've already got Megara down to about 1/3 health. This is because all of my regular punches are doing 97 damage, and every time I crit, we're doing 291 damage. And I've got 15% crit chance base on the gloves, and then I've also got my epic level pressure points, which is adding another 4%. So we're actually at almost 20% additional 20% crit chance, as well as the fact that I've taken Heavy Knuckle on my gloves. And I took Heavy Knuckle because I want to increase my base damage so that we could kill her that quickly. Okay, and we're jumping ahead into Asphodel right away here, and we can see I have taken the upgraded rarity ability from Eurydice to get a heroic deadly strike and a heroic pressure points. So we have a huge damage increase on our basic strike and 5% additional crit chance from pressure points, as well as the fact I've picked up a Divine Dash for some further protection because I'm really focusing on high damage on my basic strike. And we see here, I'm going on to the Barge of Death here, honestly my favorite elite combat in the game. We're spawning a giant shield guy here, and I'm doing 248 damage a hit against him easily, and pretty much just bursting him down very quickly. I've got my Ruthless Reflex Dash going right there for a little bit of damage increase. Every single bit of damage increase I can add to my attacks is just making critical better and better. So really just focus on building up the strike, using my Divine Dash and my weak to reduce the damage coming into me, because it is a very, very aggressive build. And I'm still only on a single dash, so I'm really relying on mitigating damage towards me as opposed to absorbing it so much. And just like that, we cleared the elite combat and escaped the Barge of Death. Okay, so in Elysium now, we haven't actually added all that much to our build. I've picked up a Ravenous Will because the damage increase from it increases all damage. So again, it's improving the ability, the effectiveness of my criticals. I've also picked up Breaching Cross because it increases the base damage of your dash attack, which on criticals is going to be a massive increase. And we can see, coming into the butterfly room right here, I'll start by launching my Talos special arm to get that 50% bonus damage. I'm doing what, about 100 base damage a hit, so 300 on crit, 365 on crit, and I'm punching it down really easy, and then use Megara to finish it off, just so I don't have too many of these elite Elysium enemies to deal with, and only 2 of them spawn, and I basically just jump up to them and I'm able to punch them in the face and kill them really quickly. I think I killed that soul there in about 2 hits. So yeah, we've managed to pump up our base strike pretty successfully at this point. Okay, and in this point of the game, we've picked up Hermes' greatest dash because we really needed the additional mobility of it, and we also picked up Blinding Flash because now we finally, between Blinding Flash and Weak, actually have the ability to apply 2 curses and activate Privileged status, which again, that's just a damage boost for our Deadly Strike, which is just going to make our criticals do more and more damage. And I really needed the dash because, again, I was focused on damage mitigation as opposed to avoiding damage. And now with the additional dashes, I have a really nice well-rounded build where I do tons of damage, and I also can't avoid strikes. And we can see me just going around these rooms and sticks here, really just bullying everyone I come across, pulling them into me using the Talos gauntlets, and then just punching them in the face for criticals over and over and over again, and they go down super easy. And here we have the completed build. I added a quick favor from Hermes because it was the best one offered, and I also added a Death Defiance ability from Athena here. I think it's Deathless Stand. Yeah, that's what it is. Because I finally found the Defiance ability earlier on from Chaos that I forgot to mention, which gives you an additional Death Defiance. And I really just wanted to walk into the boss with 4 Death Defiance for once, which is the main reason I took that one. And I go through the fight, and it is pretty easy. I don't think I even use a single Death Defiance going through, just punching the final boss in the face over and over for criticals. Unending. So very fun build to use, and it's the main way that you can use the Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish to good effect. Because of the way critical works, it scales into the late game really strongly, but as you can see, I had to cut all the way to the Fury fight before I really had anything to show you because I needed additional damage boons on top of it to really get it going. And then I selectively picked damage increasing boons that I knew would increase the damage of my strike in order to keep the build competitive as we went forward. So it's a little bit harder for new players to make good use of the Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish, but still very powerful if you know what you're doing and you understand the math behind it, which you guys watching this guide, you do now understand the math, so you can have a lot of fun playing around with how to create very high damage builds using Artemis. And that's going to take us into our second build, which is the War Huntress. Now this build is very high single target damage, but it's also very fragile and relies on using hit and run tactics that really match the Huntress god to really dance around enemies while you continuously pepper them. And this is making use of the Chiron bow, which is probably the best bow to use with Artemis if I'm, not really joking around or anything like that. And this is actually one of the more balanced builds that I've created because I'm not reliant on any single ability, as we will see as we go through this. Okay, so this build is all about just solid build principles, and we're starting with a Doom on our shot from the bow and Deadly Flourish on the criticals, and we've picked up Supporting Fire already, as well as a Blade Dash. Now, I really like taking Doom on the basic shot of the bow because it is a slow attack, but it is also very easy to hit with, so you can trigger Doom very easily. And of course, I took the critical Flourish on the Chiron bow because it's just a very good attack to have it on. Which is allowing me to very quickly burst down enemies, and I take down that sneak there without even getting hit once. So let's see how this build looks as we move forward. So jumping ahead to Asphodel here, the weakness we had was that we had very high single target damage but almost no crowd control, as well as we were very low health. So I've picked up a Poseidon cast to help with crowd control, and I've also picked up a health boon, a soul boon I should say, from Chaos, just to help us get a little bit tankier, and also so that we have the ability to force enemies away from us and also deal damage to crowds. So here you can see me using my tidal cast to separate enemies and then just really pick them off one by one using my various shots. And you can see the Supporting Fires coming in and doing quite a lot of additional damage. It's also very useful because it's helping me realize where the enemies are, which helps me direct my fire, and also means I can dash with a little bit more confidence, knowing where everyone's gonna be. So I'm really able to make it through this room pretty easily right up until all of these ranged enemies start spawning, and then I get a little bit overwhelmed because my AoE damage is still not quite there, but every single enemy I start to focus on goes down immediately. So still a very fun, very well-rounded build, And I just topped off my rare crop as well to end up with 3 heroic boons. And then in Elysium here, we can see I've got my heroic Doom Strike, I've got my heroic Blade Dash, and I've got a heroic Supporting Fire, which is doing a ton of damage, as well as adding a Greatest Reflex, an Explosive Shot, and a Flurry Cast to the build. Oh, and an Impending Doom, just to make sure that my Doom Strikes do even more damage. It's wonderful. And a farming boon from Poseidon in Ocean's Bounty, because I love Ocean's Bounty. The 60% increase in gold is fantastic. And we're going to go in here and we're going to take a look at a duo fight between Artemis and Demeter. Picking up clean kill here because I want the bonus to my critical damage, and we're going to see, once again, very safe build. She's going to spawn a whole, well, about 4 or 5 of these really tough elite enemies, and I basically just jump away using Chiron. I use the Blade Dash for a little bit of bonus damage since I have so many extra dashes, and I just keep on applying Doom and then throwing out my special attack, which just drops a whole ton of focus damage on each enemy. And you can see here, I'm going to just gun her down and then gun the next one down. It's a very fun hit and run build. This to me feels like what playing as a Huntress or a Ranger should be, where you jump around the battlefield and you're just continuously peppering enemies with arrows. So I really like this build so far. Okay, and here we are in Styx at almost our completed build. I have picked up Greater Recall from Hermes because I got a little bit lucky, so I'm picking up my casts really quickly. I've also picked up Ravenous Will because I think it's just an incredible ability, giving me an additional 30% damage. It does get countered out by Greater Recall a little bit, but I had to say Greater Recall because it's so good. Black Metal to make it so that my dashes have a little bit of a wider radius. And I've also leveled up my Clean Kill here for even more crit damage. So again, we're at a very safe, well-rounded build at this point, where I'm just continuously dashing. My Blade Wrists are actually doing a fair amount of damage on my dash, which is surprising to me. And I can basically just sit back and kill enemies. Dash around a little bit. They can never catch me because I've got the multi-dashes from Hermes. I hit them with my basic attack and then just start launching a continuous special attack at them. And if I need the extra AoE, just like right there, I check out my additional Poseidon casts just to make sure that I don't get overwhelmed too much and really force enemies back into a less savory position. And now here we are in the final build. All I've added at this stage is a Snow Burst, and the reason why I grabbed that is because I needed an additional curse to start activating privileged status as we walked into the final boss, because I didn't have Poseidon's Razor Shoals, and I also didn't have Artemis's Hunter's Mark. So adding that 40% from privileged status just makes it so that my awesome bow special just does even more damage. And again, very, very easy clear of the final boss. Very safe build. I didn't lose any Death Defiance as far as I remember, and just dashed around them, continuously shooting them to death, and the Huntress got to escape. And finally coming into our final build here, which I call the GG Easy 360 No Scope Get Good Scrub build, because yeah, it's pretty easy, because we're going to be focusing on using True Shot as a main attack here. Now this is a pretty standard cast build, but remember, Artemis already has most of the cast buff boons in her tree. So all we gotta do is sprinkle in a little bit of Hermes and we're gonna end up with a very, very strong build. And True Shot, again, is just ridiculous single target damage, and every single damage increase we stack on our cast whenever we critical is gonna be a massive, massive increase to damage. Okay, so jumping ahead to Tartarus here, I've picked up Thunder Flourish, I'm taking the Zeus Shield, and I've also got Empowering Flight and already a level 3 True Shot. Now I took the Thunder Flourish on the Shield's Flourish because I know that it's very, very powerful on it. It'll just drop lightning bolts continuously, which is going to stack really well with my cast build. And of course, grabbing pressure points right away because I want that additional crit chance from my critical weapons, and 15% is going to make a really big difference here. So I'm really just playing at fighting at range here. I use my Zeus Shield to create sort of a death zone near me, and then just start firing out my cast. You can see it's taking down every enemy in about 3 cast shots, which immediately drops my bloodstones, meaning I can just do it again, and I'm dashing around my shield's death area and calling it back to me just to help me clear the room a little bit more reliably. Okay, so jumping way ahead to the Hydra fight in Asphodel here, we can see I've added a Flurry Cast, a Billowing Strength, I've upgraded the rarity of my pressure points to Heroic, I've picked up an Urge to Kill to increase the damage of my cast even further, a Slothful Affluence to make so I make more money so I can buy more boons, a Tidal Dash to help me with crowd control, and Athena Call to help me survive a little bit better because I was lacking a little bit of defense. I've also picked up High Voltage to make so my shield lightning bolts strike in a bigger area. And then finally, I've also picked up a Quick Favor to help make my Athena Call available more often. And if you paid attention right there, all that damage was from 3 casts from my Artemis cast, which did almost a third of the Hydra's health bar, plus a little bit from the shield. So we can see already doing a massive amount of damage from the cast, even just towards the end of Asphodel. I do have to wait for my cast to come back and be available when fighting the Hydra here, but then right again, I should throw them out right there, boom, right there, and almost down to the end of the third health, another third of his health bar. So overall, very fun Area of Denial, just easy cast build, throwing the shield out, doing lots of damage with the shield, getting a little bit of my Athena Call in there as well, just to help me prevent some damage as I'm going through, and we can see that the shield is really just helping me deal with crowd control, doing a lot of damage. Greater Call is up and available. We're just going to knock down this final Hydra head here and throwing out the shield and ding, down. Okay, and we have the final little bit of the Hydra head. Throw out that shield right where he's going to stand, hit him with all my casts, and he's already almost down. Trigger my call, and then just go punch him in the face once, and he's done. And with that, we can move on to Elysium. And then jumping ahead in Elysium here, we can see I've finally found a boon for my basic attack. It's a Doom boon, just to help me trigger privileged status. I also picked up a Jolted Curse from Zeus, because obviously my shield is going to be hitting with lightning very often, so we're going to apply Jolted very often. So now we have access to privileged status as well for more damage with True Shot, as well as the fact that it's already level 4. So overall, True Shot's now doing a massive amount of damage, as we're going to see in this Asterius fight. Really love fighting Asterius as an example for how solid these builds are, because he's easy to dash around and he gives you a good idea of how much damage overall you're doing, as well as the fact that he's actually very resistant to my shield since he's moving around so much. And we see a little bit of a weakness of the build at this point, where I have to wait for my Bloodstones to come back before I can obviously hit him with my cast again. Throwing a couple of them in there, getting him down to almost a third health, and then just really, again, playing like a Huntress, dashing around and waiting for the correct time to strike again. Throwing out my cast, he's already at 50% health, and then we've got my call up, so I'm pretty sure I'm just going to get super aggressive here and punch him in the face, keep my shield on him, yeah, there we go, and then throw my cast out again. Every single cast is doing 339 damage base at this point, every single time without criticaling. So we have a ton of ranged pressure that we can apply to enemies here, and Asterius is feeling the brunt of it right now, and he's about to be going down, taking a bunch of lightning bolts and then casts, done. And you can see the curve on the True Shot there, pulled around and hit him in the back, even though I was aiming off to the right of him. So True Shot's very good because it is fast, travels very fast, and it also has very good heat-seeking capabilities. And we are once again in Styx near the end of this build, and we can see I've added a lot in this final couple of rooms, where we've gone Impending Doom already, Heaven's Vengeance, Razor Shoals, Mirage Shot, Ferocious Guard, what is it called? It's the Lightning Rod, and then also a Greatest Reflex, and the Double Strike, the ability for lightning to strike twice from a single activation. So we can see that my cast abilities have really come into their own in this last couple of rooms, because with Mirage Shot we're now launching more casts, and right there, that's six projectiles just boom, flying out and annihilating everybody, as well as the fact that if I just leave my Bloodstones on the ground, they're now causing ridiculously powerful lightning strikes, and the fact that they have a wider radius and they strike more often. So we're in really good shape, and our cast is doing a ton of damage. And you can see I'm taking a lot of damage here, so just to be safe, I throw down my Athena Call, and then Lightning Bolt striking this guy did a whole ton of damage just from my Bloodstones. So we have a very, very strong mature cast build here. And that was actually the final stages of the build. Really strong cast build, really focused on ranged attacks. We've got a level 4 Flourish, Thunder Flourish that we're going into, level 4 True Shot that we're going into against the boss here. And again, just continuing to play that Huntress style where we dash around, continuously hit him with our ranged attacks, and make it so that he can't punish us, except for when we want to, when we get Athena on us, and we've got that nice invulnerability and deflect for, again, a pretty nice, easy final boss clear. And now those of you who are familiar with my videos might be shocked by this, but we actually have a bonus for you. This is still the 360 no scope, easy GG, jerky build, but I wanted to show a little bit different of a cast build, where we've now got some more boons from Demeter, increasing our damage on our casts, as well as the Snow Burst, which is going to help us apply more curses as we go along. And I also want to show how good supporting fire is with the Adamant Rail. This is the Lucifer aspect of the rail, and you can see once I fire that beam, it's just continuous supporting fire arrows coming out, each of them doing around 72 damage when they critical. So very, very strong. And this is just sort of an alternative build style to the previous cast build, where I'm reliant on the cast but not really, and I can as you can see, I leave them on the ground more to take advantage of the lightning strikes coming down, and focus instead in just applying a lot of supporting fire from the basic attack of the weapon. And very effective, very safe. All these lightning strikes just going down and killing the satyr right there. And so looking ahead here we have the finished build. I've added a broken resolve and a exit wounds just to further increase the damage of my cast. I'm using, as you can see, Aphrodite for a little bit of damage resistance, and I've also picked up, I wanted to show you guys the build where I'm using the increased critical damage Heart Rend from Aphrodite and Artemis, because that additional 50% crit damage is nice. And that's going to wrap up our cast builds. Okay, so now we're just going to put a nice little decorative bow on the package of information that I've delivered to you guys in this video. Artemis is a damage dealing support god that is more challenging to main than other gods. She has some of the best general boons in the game in supporting fire and pressure points that fit into pretty much any build, and the weapon that you take her on is really going to make a difference to how effective she is. Specifically, you want to take either rapid striking weapons, or you want to take weapons with bonus damage on them or additional cast effects. Once you understand how critical works with the math behind it, and how you do triple damage, triple total damage on any attack that inflicts a critical, you can really start to make good use of her Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish on the correct weapons in the correct builds, where you find the right supporting boons for it, which is really what holds back Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish from being great in their slot, because they require a lot of additional boons and knowledge to make work well. But as we saw in some of the sample builds there, once you get those additional boons, you are just punching out so much damage that you're able to kill any of the tougher enemies very quickly, leaving you only with the need to figure out how to handle large groups of enemies. So Artemis is tied for my favorite god in the game, but she is a little bit hard for beginners to get used to. I struggled a lot early on when I was using her, trying to make use of Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish, and not really getting anywhere. So for beginners, I'm going to recommend that you guys focus on taking pressure points and supporting fire, because they're going to help teach you how to use Artemis, as well as the fact that they're really strong and fit on any build. From there, as you get better at the game, and hopefully from this guide you got enough knowledge to understand how critical works, you can start playing around with Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish, especially as you unlock more of the Infernal Arms, the upgraded ones that give you the correct bonuses. They're going to really make those two abilities scary. In the meantime, as I said, take pressure points, take supporting fire, and make use of her cast and call, because they are both very strong and do a lot of single target damage, and really I just find them very fun to play with because it feels like you're in a very hit and run style of gameplay, dashing around and just continually peppering your enemies. Advanced players should also follow the beginner player advice and use her for support in her pressure points and supporting fire, as well as her other abilities as well. But as I said, as you get better at the game and you get access to more reliable ways to collect the boons that you want, as well as the Infernal Arms that stack well with critical, you should really try out Deadly Strike and Deadly Flourish. They're very fun to play with, and it lets you create very high damage builds where you really focus on a single attack and then just build up support around them. Around your single attack to make so that you can clear bosses and rooms easier. And also, whenever you are going through a run and going through builds, if you are low on damage, Artemis is the god that you're gonna want to look for, because she adds just overall damage with really very little to no downsides. She actually, I would say, adds more damage than the God of War Ares himself, at least in her general buff wounds and the fact that they apply to all damage that you inflict. I hope that you guys enjoyed this guide and learned a lot more about Artemis and how to use her effectively in the Hades game. If I miss any builds that you like to use with her, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below so that other beginners coming to this guide are going to get more ideas for how to run their runs. Or if you have other tips that you think are important for people to know, please leave them down there as well. Let's help people get right into this game and really enjoy what Supergiant has presented to us. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. I hope you found this video valuable. I will see you in the next one. And remember, there is no escape.